Hey everybody, hope and pray that you're doing well. Today as we come to our word from the word. And today that word is time. Time. Now, there's one thing here as we come to the last verse in Judges, and it's really more just a look at what's been going on and even a look ahead to the book of Ruth, which we're really not going to spend a lot of time in Ruth, but just a glimpse ahead at that. And to look here at the end of Judges, there's a verse here at the very end, and it's not a prayer verse, but it shows us and sheds some light on exactly what's going on. So Judges chapter 21, verse 25, it says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." Now, I even mentioned and alluded to this earlier in the week that there's always a remnant. There's always some faithful ones going on. And even as we look ahead to Ruth, I do want to read one verse from Ruth chapter 1, verse 6. It says, "Then she arose with her daughters in law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread." Now, see, there was a famine going on, and so even in the midst of this, even in the midst of the book of Judges, and Ruth chapter 1 tells us that it was going on during the time of Judges, God was still being gracious. God was still, as we have seen throughout our stories that we've looked at in the book of Judges, that every time that they would get back with the Lord, that the judge would steer them back in the right direction, that the Lord would bless them, and they would continue to live in peace until that judge died, and then they would go back into this cycle that we see over and over again. But there's one thing I ran across this one commentator, Gary Enrig. He said this, and he was just giving a summary from this verse and looking at the final few chapters of Judges. And I mentioned yesterday that it was so many things going on in the last few chapters of Judges that um, it just doesn't seem right. It's hard for us to understand how God's people could act this way. And it kind of sheds some light. See, all this is talking about there's no king in Israel, there's no king, there's no king. But there's something that I like how he puts it. He says, Judges 19 through 21 gives us the ugliest story in the Bible. The key to it is that at every stage, men were acting on the basis of what was right in their own eyes. As far as the men of Gibeah were concerned, rape was all right. To the farmer and the Levite in the house, homosexual rape was unthinkable, but other rape was acceptable. The men of Benjamin thought it was right to overlook sin and defend evil men. To Israel, revenge and retaliation would be justified, and to solve their problems about marriage for the Benjamites, the massacre of innocent people and kidnapping could be condoned. The interesting thing is, he goes on to say, that none of this had anything to do with idolatry or Baal worship, at least not where it's mentioned. It began with individuals ignoring the law of God, doing what was right in their own eyes, and it led a whole nation into moral collapse. Now, even as I read those words, I couldn't help but think about our nation. Now, we're not Israel, and I'm not even trying to make that comparison one bit. But the truth is that any nation that turns its back on God is headed in an awful direction. And as we see this cycle through the book of Judges, we've really had these cycles even in our history, times where maybe even the nation was drawn closer together. I mean, I even think back to 9/11, and a horrible time, but a time where everybody was looking for something. So many were piled into churches and praying and comforting each other and even looking for answers. And yes, some, it made them angry with God. Some saw the judgment of God and repented. But now, 20 years later, What does it look like now? It looks like we've gone right back to the same cycle. And if nothing else, with every cycle, as it was with Judges, it seemed like in every cycle, it gets a little bit worse. Now, see, the thing is, I mentioned this even Sunday, that we can't look around and say that our hope is gone, because our hope should be in the Lord and in the Lord alone. That we don't have to look to the government, and we don't look to them for hope. We don't look to people for hope, but we look to the Lord for hope. So if there was being a story written about your life, don't let it kind of end with, and the people were doing what was right in their own eyes. Let's be a prayerful people who seek God's face, as we've talked about all week, before, during, and even long after the battle is over, that we continue to seek the will of the Lord. We continue to seek His face. We continue to seek His word, asking His Spirit to move in us and to guide us in all that we do. That way we don't do what's right in our own eyes, but we only do what's right in the Lord's eyes. God bless you, and I pray you have a great, great day.